In August 1945, Eastman Kodak headquarters in Rochester, New York, began receiving unusual complaints from its customers. A large batch of photographic film had become fogged, with developed images emerging covered in hundreds of tiny white dots. While such contamination was unacceptable in the best of cases, in this instance it was particularly concerning as the product in question was not regular photographic film, but an extremely sensitive emulsion used for X-rays. Unwanted spots on an image could, for example, mean the difference between spotting a tumor or not, or spotting one that wasn't there. So Kodak dispatched one of its top scientists, Julian Webb, to get to the bottom of the matter. Given the random distribution of the fog in, Webb immediately deduced that it was caused not by light exposure, but rather radioactive contamination in the film packaging. This was hardly a new problem. Indeed, for decades, Kodak had been fighting a methodical battle to keep radioactive contamination out of its supply chain. The main culprit was radium, an element discovered by Marie Curie in 1898 and widely used in luminous clock and watch dials, cancer therapy, and countless radioactive quack cures. Contamination from radium plants often found its way into the cardboard used to make the packaging for photographic film, causing the film to become fogged from radiation exposure. In response, Kodak bought up the pulp and paper mills where the packaging was made so that it could more tightly control the manufacturing process. Combing through production records, Webb determines that the contaminated packaging came from a single mill in Vincennes, southern Indiana. This mill specialized in the production of strawboard used as a stiffener between sheets of X-ray film, and had produced the contaminated batch around August the 6th. So far, so good, but the investigation took an unexpected turn as Webb discovered that the contaminant was not, in fact, radium as he had initially suspected. Unlike radium, which was an alpha particle emitter, the mystery contaminant emitted more penetrating beta particles and had an extremely short half-life of around 30 days. Webb would later identify this element as cerium-141, an isotope not found in nature but commonly produced by nuclear fission. To Webb, this ruled out the straw as the source of the contamination, as it was stored indoors for long periods before use, and all the cerium-141 would have decayed away. This left only one possible source, the water in the nearby Wabash River, also used in the manufacturing process. This suspicion was strengthened when Webb learned of a similarly contaminated batch of strawboard produced by another Kodak plant in Iowa. Although the two plants were nearly 450 miles apart, the two batches were produced at the exact same time and their contamination profiles were identical. The Tamer plant was also located next to the Iowa River. Based on the courses of the Iowa and Wabash rivers and continental rainfall patterns, Webb came to a startling conclusion. In mid-July, somewhere in the southwest United States, a large event had released a large amount of radioactive fission products in the atmosphere. These contaminants had fallen to Earth as rain and drained into the rivers, which then carried them some 1,200 kilometers north to Vincennes and Tamer. Webb's deduction turned out to be eerily accurate, for that unspecified fission event was none other than the Trinity test, the world's first nuclear detonation. At 5:29 a.m. on July the 16th, 1945, the sky above Alamogordo, New Mexico, lit up with a blinding flash as the world's first nuclear weapon, codenamed Trinity, detonated with the force of 22,000 tons of TNT. The test was the culmination of 3 years of work by over 130,000 people across the United States and some $23 billion in government investment, a colossal undertaking known as the Manhattan Project. It was also one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war, and the US government was determined to keep it that way. Though a nuclear explosion might seem like a rather difficult thing to hide, the official cover story explained away the blast as the accidental detonation of a stockpile of conventional explosives, a common enough occurrence in wartime. The massive cloud of radioactive fallout, however, was harder to conceal, but as few people owned Geiger counters, the government figured that nobody would notice. They had not counted on Julian Webb and Kodak's highly refined quality control system. Whether Webb, who had previously worked on the Manhattan Project, knew about the Trinity test in 1945 is unclear, but whatever the case, he kept his mouth shut until after the war, when the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki dramatically brought the American atomic bomb project to the public's attention. Webb published his findings in 1949 in an article in the journal Physical Review, concluding the most likely explanation of the source of this radioactive contaminant appears to be that it consisted of wind-borne radioactive fission products derived from the atom bomb detonation in New Mexico on July the 16th, 1945. While this incident makes for a fascinating footnote in the history of the Manhattan Project, the story did not end there. In December 1950, the Atomic Energy Commission established the Nevada Test Site, a 3,500 square kilometer area, 105 kilometers northwest of Las Vegas, for the testing of nuclear weapons. This went against the recommendations recommendations by scientists like Stafford Warren, who recommended tests be conducted at least 240 kilometers away from major population centers, and Colonel B.G. Holzman, who called for the establishment of nuclear test sites on the East Coast so prevailing westerly winds would carry fallout safely to sea. However, proximity to existing nuclear weapons laboratories like Los Alamos and Sandia took precedence over all other factors, and on January 27, 1951, the first of 100 above-ground nuclear tests on U.S. soil took place at Frenchman Flat within the test site. As predicted, fallout from the 1 kiloton test, codenamed Ranger Able, drifted for thousands of kilometers across the continental United States. At Kodak headquarters in Rochester, 4,000 kilometers away, snow fell with radioactive readings 25 times higher than regular background levels. Concerned that this fallout could interfere with its film manufacturing process, just as it had in 1945, Kodak contacted the AEC to alert them about the contamination. In response, the AEC assured Kodak that there was nothing to worry about and issued a press release stating that it was investigating reports that snow that fell in Rochester was measurably radioactive. The reports indicate that there is no possibility of harm to humans or animals. All necessary precautions, including radiation surveys and patrolling, are being undertaken to ensure that safety conditions are maintained. In reality, no such precautions were being taken, and as fallout continued to drift over Rochester, a frustrated Kodak threatened to sue the US government for the considerable amount of damage to our products resulting from the Nevada tests or from any further atomic energy tests. Incredibly, the government acceded to Kodak's demands and reached a secret agreement with the company. The AEC would provide Kodak with the dates of future nuclear tests and predicted fallout patterns, allowing it to protect its manufacturing process accordingly. In exchange, Kodak would keep secret everything it knew about the American nuclear weapons program. Other photographic film manufacturers would soon come to similar agreements. This cozy arrangement, however, was not extended to the rest of the American population. Indeed, while the AEC was aware from the very beginning of the dangers of fallout, for decades it chose to downplay these risks in the name of national security. A particular concern was the fission product iodine-131, which typically enters the food chain via contaminated cow's milk. As iodine is absorbed by the thyroid gland, iodine-131 contamination can lead to elevated levels of normally rare thyroid cancer, particularly in children. And while such contamination can be protected against by taking iodine supplements, saturating the thyroid and preventing further iodine-131 from being absorbed, such precautions require forewarning of upcoming nuclear tests, warnings that the AEC failed to provide. According to a 1997 report by the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, or IEER, the AEC had strong evidence of the widespread contamination of the American milk supply as early as 1953, yet chose not to reveal this to the American public. Thus, for more than a decade, fallout from the Nevada test site continued to drift across the country until in 1963, when the United States signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty and nuclear testing moved underground. But by then, the damage was already done. The National Cancer Institute had linked more than 7,500 cases of thyroid cancer to US above-ground nuclear tests between 1951 and 1963. How many millions more were also affected can only be guessed at. Such revelations have raised serious questions as to Kodak's complicity in concealing the dangers of atomic testing from the American public. As nuclear weapons expert and policy analyst Stephen Schwartz stated in 1998, did they have a moral or ethical responsibility? I think you could make a strong case that they did. But I wouldn't look at Kodak with today's eyes. They were doing their jobs and perhaps simply didn't know any better. Indeed, the majority of analysts place the blame squarely on the United States government, who for decades consistently placed Cold War security above the well-being of its citizens. The whole matter was perhaps best summed up by Iowa Democratic Senator Tom Harkin, who stated in a 1998 Senate hearing, Kodak complained to the Atomic Energy Commission, and that government agency agreed to give Kodak advanced information on future tests, including expected distribution of radioactive material in order to anticipate local contamination. In fact, the government warned the entire photographic industry and provided maps and forecasts of potential contamination. Where, I ask, were the maps for dairy farmers? Where were the warnings to parents of children in these areas? So here we are, Mr. Chairman. The government protected rolls of film, but not the lives of our kids. There is something wrong with this picture. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.